Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jason Martinez with Eduphoria. Ed Cunningham is on with us, and we also have, we're blessed to have just kind of sitting in and listening, Jeremy Trainer, one of our developers, the main developer that's kind of working on what we're going to show you today. And then also Felicia Riley, our kind of marketing team person, is also on with us. And so we're glad to have a full group. Last I looked, we have between 350 and 400 folks registered for this, and so we're glad you guys are excited about the topic as we are. And so let's go ahead and get started. I'll move it over to Ed, and just let me just talk about first. We're going to reiterate this about probably 10 times during this. This is like the first showing of this. This does not, you do not have this today, and so don't be trying to do it as soon as we're done. We're going to show this multiple times if needed. It's going to release soon. There are districts that I'm sure Ed's going to talk about that are beta testing this, but we don't have an exact date. But this is not a dream. Ed and I have had this dream of doing this when we were at districts back in the day. Just to give you a first look of the reality of this actually happening is very exciting for all of us. And so with no more introduction, I'll turn it over to Ed, and he can start getting into the content.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Yeah, we're very excited about this. So we're going to talk about custom data imports today, and I'm going to kind of run through kind of a fast-paced run through of what is involved in custom data importing, with the idea that you're going to retain pieces of information. Let's kind of focus on the big picture of what is involved in it. That way, when you go back and you do have it in your hands to play with, you'll have the kind of big picture, and you'll know what to bring to the table, and you'll have to kind of go over the details at that time. So we're super excited about custom data importing. Kind of a word about what this is, kind of at the bigger picture of what we're doing here. We have a larger kind of internal name for a project that we've been working on for a little while now, where it's basically we're focusing on components of data in for Aware and components of data out for Aware. So data in and data out. And this is things, some things that you don't even see. Like, for example, a while back, we improved the way that we import, like when everybody's importing their star files at the same time, we improved the way that we handle that so that those can upload to your organization faster. Something that you may not have even noticed happen, but it's something that on our end made everything a little bit better for data import, so that your data output can be a whole lot faster and smoother. Stuff like that. Things like the way our developers can build one of our built-in importers faster. They have a tool now for building importers faster, so they can get a turnaround to kind of the frequently used importers. This, however, is one of the kind of first entries to the data in project that really impacts districts, and it's something that y'all have been asking for a long time. So I'm going to jump right into it and talk about the main components of that. But before I do, I have on the screen some general topics related to data in and data out that we are discussing for now and for the next calendar year of development, so 2017 all the way through 2018 calendar years of development. In addition to custom data imports, which is what we're talking about today, test authoring is currently underway. Improvements to test authoring is currently underway, and we've got some really cool stuff. We're excited to hopefully show y'all before the end of this calendar year. We've got online testing improvements that we've been discussing, improvements to student forms, and improvements to the way data views work. These are just some of the sort of general topics that we're talking about to be working on under this giant umbrella of ongoing Aware development. So I know Strive's gotten a lot of attention because it's the big new super cool product out there for professional learning planning, and we're very excited about that. But for folks like me and Jason, who, Jason trained me on Aware. I remember asking him about custom data imports as a feature requests. And so this is something that we're super excited about. And so hopefully y'all are too. There are four main components of data importing that you customize. And those four main components that we're going to go over today in this sort of demonstration are managing a custom test type. So step one will be you're going to actually create what that test type is, the same way that we have built-in test types like STAR and TELPAS, and then you have your local test types that you design. You're going to manage a custom test type. You're going to manage the files There's no way to do custom data importing without having some familiarity with your own files and maybe some spreadsheet knowledge, because you will have to manage your files to match that custom import. Then, of course, importing the file, which makes sense. You're going to upload it into the system. And then finally, managing views so that folks can see the data that you've imported. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end there. That one is a little bit straightforward. Since y'all are all Eduforians, you probably already kind of have an idea what that's going to look like. Okay. We have a help topic that I will introduce you to in Aware. Under the Aware Management section, we have a topic called custom data files. In fact, if you go to the little search bar in our help menu and just type in custom data files, you will get to this this help article. It sort of introduces you to the idea that we have this and that in the very near future it's coming. But then also those 4 things that I just listed out, each of those topics has its own help article. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you up front, these are not glamorous help articles. They don't have friendly pictures yet. They don't have super friendly language. It's very technical, because the idea here is the person who's importing the file is going to need a lot of details to make sure that they get those files right. So these are very much for Aware managers and for spreadsheet people and for data people. Of course, that's our audience today, so I know that y'all will do just fine with these. So if you want to go ahead and read through these and kind of familiarize yourselves with them over the next few weeks while we continue to beta test custom importing, that might help you know what you want to bring to the table. But I also just wanted to point this out to you, that the help articles are already there, so that this is pretty much ready to go. We just gotta get a few successful imports in before we feel comfortable releasing this to everybody. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. I am in my demo site. Okay, let me go ahead and zoom out just a little bit so y'all are familiar with. There's no huge user interface changes here in terms of how we're going to do this. It's going to be fairly familiar to you. When I say the first step is test type management, most of y'all probably already thought in your heads of going to the assessment tabs where you manage your test types down here at the bottom. And that's exactly what we do. If we want to have a new test type for custom importing, we simply say add a test type, and then the little wizard over here on the right shows up where you can manage what that test type's title is. And there's one new component that you won't have now, but you'll have once this releases for you, and that is a checkbox. This is a test type for custom imports. Pretty straightforward, right? So if I'm doing some sort of fancy reading inventory that we do in another system that we want to export from that system and put into Eduforia, I would title it fancy reading inventory. I would check the little box here and I would say finish or next, which creates that test type. So I say next, finish, and the next thing you know, I have the test type for fancy reading inventory. Okay. It has similar features to the other test types that you manage. In fact, let me go ahead and back out just a little bit. Under configure test types, there's a new section. You've got your local test types at the top. You've got your built-in star test types at the bottom. And right here in the middle are your new custom import test types. And you can see here where Jason and I have been doing some testing here. Different types of test types. Jason actually did some sample TSI, which I think a lot of y'all listening will be interested in. So I'll show you what that ended up looking like. That's pretty cool. And then we just kind of made some up too. Okay, so here's this fancy reading inventory that I just invented. And the 3 options at the top are the exact same options that you've had in Aware for your local test types forever. They also exist for STAR and TELPAS and other built-in test types. These are those options that you get to say, I want teachers to be able to view these data or not. I want it to show up on the student's profile, test history or not, that sort of thing. So those checks appear. And then instead of the performance levels, we have something called manage extensions. Okay, so the deal with custom importing is you have completely in your hands the ability to design the fields that you want to show up in Aware. So when you go into an Aware view and you bring those columns over in the columns tab, you get to decide what those columns are. Okay, now you might have a file with 1,000 fields, but if you only want 10 of those fields, you would want to narrow it down to what those fields are. I kind of exaggerated with 1,000 fields, unless it was, what's that, that star accountability file. The consolidated accountability file is pretty big, but most of the time you have kind of smaller files, but you don't have to import every field. You would decide what those fields are. Now there's 2 types of fields that Aware would recognize. The first type is default fields, ones that we already support. So think of every time you've ever gone in and looked at a test in Aware, you've looked at a star, you've looked at a local test, and what shows up in the default view, the very first view that shows up, you've got raw score, you've got percent score, you've got some performance levels, you've got date taken, okay? We've got certain fields like student last name, student first name, date of birth. There's things that we already have in Aware, and in those help articles that I talked about before, we actually list out all of the fields that Aware already has. And you never have to manage those yourself. We manage them for you. As long as you call it raw score, then it's called raw score and we recognize it and we will import it. Okay, but the second type of field that you're going to want, and this is the more prominent type, is going to be extensions. What types of fields are specific to the test that you're importing, and you're going to have to define those here in this space. Okay, and so we've got some rules for defining extensions, and those rules follow a structure which is located right here, extension code structure. Above that is a little link that will actually bring you to the help article that I showed you at the beginning of this webinar. If you click on that link, it starts you off to kind of walk you through the process. So you can always go here to start managing a new test type, then click the link and open up the help article and have it up in two separate windows. You can always have the help article going because we put that right there for you. Okay, so you're going to follow some rules, and I'm not going to go too far into the details about how this works. I'll give you some examples instead. Let me go ahead and just jump to a make-believe. What was one make-believe one that I did? Here we go. Custom testing is the best. Here's a make-believe set of extensions that I did. The first one I called performance level. And so you can see here that the field name is the first component of extension definition. You write out exactly what you want to show in the view when you pull that column over. And so I called it performance level. Here's another one that I called intervention level. The third one here I called national rank score. Then I called one comments, rank, and percentile. Okay, so basically whatever you want to display in the view, that's what you put first. And then you put this little bar or pipe icon that's located just above the enter key in your keyboard. And then you type what type of field this is. And we support a few different types of fields. We support numbers. So basically a raw score would be an example of a number, right? Okay, so maybe you have something that displays some sort of number that's not a percentage. You would put that as a number type field. We support text. Text is basically any string combination that you can imagine. So text is sort of this all-encompassing field. I don't see too many people using text fields, but we do support this. That way, if you have something you want to import that doesn't quite fit into one of the other field types, you can just call it text and it'll import. And my example of a comments field is what I did there. I imagined a test where the person who was grading the student got to put comments in. And so I invented a field called comments, and sure enough, those imported into my Aware view just fine. The next field type is percent, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's a number that's treated as a percentage, okay? And the cool thing about a percent field is it shows up in Aware as a percentage, and when you export that view to Excel, it's treated as a percentage, okay? So by telling Aware this number is a percent, you can have the number 25 or you can have the number 25%. It doesn't matter. Aware will recognize it as such because that's what you put there. And you can see that I have two examples of percent fields here. Number 5 and number 6 were both percent fields. And then finally, and this is probably the best of all of these, because this I see a lot of people doing inventory type data in outside systems, and I kind of feel like this relates a lot to what people would want from their inventories, and that's a field code. A field code, I want you to think of, I'm going to specifically call out Telpass, because Telpass has those ratings for each of the different like listening and speaking and so forth. And the ratings come in as field codes, where that the Telpass file actually has 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have to translate those to beginning, intermediate, advanced, and all those sorts of things. Those are field codes. So we're going to ask you to take one extra step and actually put in the file what you want the field code to say. So rather it coming in as a 1, 2, 3, 4, actually translate that as the field code. But then you get to design the possible values for that header. And so to show you how that works, these first two extensions performance level, and intervention level, you'll notice that I made them field codes, and that the possible values for performance level are failed and passed. And so you write down POSS equals, and then you write the values that it could possibly be. My possible values for intervention level are not applicable, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Okay, and so the cool thing about this, and we'll see this in an aware view that I show y'all later, you're going to actually get to summarize data in aware by each of these values. Okay, now that's different from a regular text field where we don't know what's going to be in the file, so we let you import it, but we can't summarize it. You can't summarize by kind of an infinite number of possibilities. But since we know for sure that these are the only possible values that will show up for that field code, then when you do a summary by district or campus or teacher or whatever, you're going to actually be able to see the percentage of students who were, say, tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3. So think about the way in aware right now. Go ahead, Jason.
I have an example that they probably can understand. I was thinking right now. So like on a STAR test for like math and science, how you we have griddable answers, numerical response answers. In aware, without looking at the individual student response, we can't summarize the infinite number of possible things that some student may bubble in on their grid, because that's an infinite number of possibilities. And so on that summary, it's just a correct or incorrect, because we can't give you 19 kids bubbled in this number, 4 kids bubbled in this other one, because there's an infinite number of possibilities. So likewise, for the text field, that's how that would work. We can't possibly summarize together every possible text thing, but if you have these field codes where it's just this limited number of possibilities, like a multiple choice answer is limited number of possibilities of A, B, C, D or whatever, then we can summarize what percentage of students bubbled in this or answered this. And so in this case, what percentage of students are tier 2, because there's only a possible of 4 different things that are in the file. So hopefully that makes sense.
That's a good example. I didn't think about that. I was going to go with the way we do star progress, the way you summarize star progress. So there's plenty of examples in aware of how this works, and we'll see Jason's TSI example and my custom testing example here in a minute in aware, and you'll see how that works. So this is how managing extension works. There's some details that that are completely explained in the help articles that are not necessarily appropriate for this demo, where we talk a little bit about how editing these might work, and if you have some issues with importing, how you might need to kind of add extensions and so forth. And so we're not going to get into those for right now, but the reason I brought that up is you may notice that this is sort of a phase 1 interface. We'll call it that. This is a phase 1 interface that asks you to define these, but what we didn't do is give you extra features like the ability to remove them, because we don't know what that would do to your data if you remove something that maybe had something tied to it. We didn't give you anything that tries to predict what you were doing, or because this is phase 1 of custom data importing. So one of the things that we would like to do when this does roll out is work with some folks who have built some custom imports. I think TSI is going to be one of the more prominent ones, and maybe we'll add to our help article some examples of what people have built, maybe some screenshots of what you see on the screen right now, for example, that maybe multiple people have built different examples, so that over time, that's not quite a community of custom importing. That might be something we can explore later on, but for right now, we can share ideas through our help articles about what people have tried and what works. Okay, so that's custom importing, and the next step, I'm sorry, that's a test type management. The next step in custom importing is managing your data file. So I'm going to actually switch to a data file that I built for testing. Okay, this is a data file that I built. Don't worry about the values too much in the data file because they're nonsense. We just wanted to kind of test what would happen. I have in my data file a column for student local ID, and then I have student last name, student first name, and student date of birth. And the reason I did that is because I actually created multiple files to test this, and we have 2 ways of importing data, and I needed to test both ways. Okay, so for the sake of sort of general knowledge, understand that we can link any of your custom data imports to student records if we have some sort of values that we know are in aware. Okay, so one possible way to link on student records is to use student local ID. Okay, your student local ID or student state ID. Those are two different ID numbers that are going to be unique to students in your organization. So if your file has local ID or their PEIMS ID number, the one used for STAR, then we can import it. Okay, my sample file used student local ID, but PEIMS ID would also work. That being said, this is one of those areas where you need to be careful, because as soon as you start Excel file management and you open up something in Excel, if any of y'all use local ID numbers with leading zeros, it's going to cause a problem when you try to convert it to a CSV file, because importing it has to be a CSV. So I'm going to recommend that you actually, I'm not doing this here in my screenshot or in my window right now, but I actually recommend that you treat these numbers as text, since you're going to convert it to a CSV anyway. Treat these numbers as texts so that you can have a leading zero at the beginning of numbers like this that I'm showing you, and it won't lose that zero. Okay. That being said, for right now, we're going to put kind of Excel management knowledge on you guys. So if you've got a trick to not losing leading zeros, by all means use that. I just wanted to make you aware of that. There is a second option for importing student data. This is going to be value especially for a file like TSI or something that's done in another system where maybe they don't have your student local IDs, okay? Because some people take TSI at their local community college or university or something like that, and they get assigned an ID number that's not necessarily your local ID number. In these cases, you can potentially use a combination of student last name and student first name and student date of birth. If you have all three of these fields in the file, then you do not have to have a local ID. What we'll do is we'll match them, and if all three of them match, we will import that record. Okay, in fact, one of the tests that I did was to see what happened if some of my students had the wrong date of birth, and what happened was we imported the ones that were correct, and the ones that were not correct, it said some rows didn't import, and I was able to go back in and see which rows didn't import and make those fixes. Okay, so you are able to use either an ID or a combination of student last name, student first name, and student date of birth. You'll notice that the headers that I use are very specific, but that they're not case sensitive. So student date of birth, I've got some capital letters. Student first name, student last name, I've got all lowercase letters. It is not case sensitive, but you need to make sure that you have the right spelling. I can't do like Stu last name or something like that. It has to be student last name. Okay. Also included in my file, I have raw score and percent score and date tested and campus ID. These are all examples of default fields that Aware already knows. I did not define these fields just a minute ago when I was showing you guys extension definitions, because these are fields that already exist in Aware. Campus ID is a cool one to include in your files. Some of you may not have a file that includes campus ID because maybe the students took it somewhere else, like the TSI example. However, if you are able to add campus ID to the file, that's an extra layer for where they are versus where they were views. Okay, you're always able to see the data where they are, but if you want to get some good where they were data, you're going to want to include campus ID if possible. Okay, so for my students, I knew what campus they were on, so I was able to drop that into this fake file that I built. Okay, other possible fields that you may want to consider, and we'll talk a little bit more about this on data importing, test grade and test subject. Okay, depending on the file that you're importing, TSI is a perfect example. You may actually have multiple grade levels or multiple subjects included in one file. And your custom importing does support this. You are able to actually import the file using a test grade column, and you would actually include those values here. Well, that's being treated like a date because you're gonna have to excuse that, I wasn't paying attention. That is I did you insert a column, and let me make that a number. So it has to actually include the grade level there. You can use the word third. All of this is explained in the help menu. But if you include the grade level in the file, then we'll show you on importing in a minute. That actually you can just do one big file import. Jason, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I kind of have there's a question that goes along that I hope I can answer clearly. The question was, will it kick it back if there are duplicate student IDs? Meaning, if someone made a clerical error and put two student IDs with two different names. So it does verify multiple times. Now, keep in mind that there are going to be some files, and I know for a fact because I played with the TSI file or some example TSI files that there are duplicate records for the same student because there's a math record and then there's a reading record. I mean, and so in that case, it wouldn't give you an error because it's the same student with the ID verified with the student name and date of birth or whatever. Now, if you had the case to where you didn't put name and date of birth in there and it was only ID, that would probably overwrite because it wouldn't be verifying on more than one thing. But if you have ID in there along with last name or date of birth or something that it can verify, if it sees an ID with a different date of birth, Ed did some of that testing and it did it just like you do on Star where you get a history file that says some unread lines. Ed could show you that in a minute. He probably will, where it won't import that one student or that student that it doesn't match up because it doesn't match to what we're expecting.
Right. It's ID or the combination of these three. Those are what it's looking for. So my recommendation would be, I actually recommend keeping a master file and then creating your CSVs from that. I'm not sure if you can see this, but here on the screen, I actually have multiple tabs open where I was playing with different things, and I actually exported these as separate CSVs for demonstration purpose. And some people might even want to go so far as to maybe build their own. Like if you're trying to match records with Testing Campus or things like that, you might even manage your own database some kind of way and then export from like Access, Microsoft Access or something like that. Again, I can't get too far into Excel file management on that, but I would recommend keeping a master system in place to keep up with these and then export them. And when you export it, you don't necessarily have to include last name, first name, and date of birth if you include the ID. Okay, so you could have ID in the file without these pieces of information, or you could have those three pieces of information without ID. Okay, so also on my screen here, over here to the right, we have the custom fields that I built. You may remember the extensions that I showed you, and you can see here where performance level and intervention level were my two field codes, and my values that I have here on the screen are the exact values that I included in the extension definitions. This was a number field. Here's my comments field, where it's just a text. Some of the kids had a comment and some of the kids didn't, and that actually imported into Aware just fine. And then here are my two percent fields, rank and percentile. You'll notice that my rank field has no percent sign, and my percentile field does have a percent sign. The deal here is your file can be one or the other. It doesn't matter. Because I told the extension that this is a percent field, it just really just looks at the number and it strips away this percent sign. So because then in Aware adds the percent sign for you. Okay, so your file might come in with a percent sign or it might not, but if you want it to be treated like a percent, you just tell it that on the test type management, and then your file will be just fine. Okay, so most of your time in custom data importing will probably be spent file managing. Okay, so we recommend very deliberate file management, very careful file management, making sure that your headers have the right names and so forth. But we also recommend that whoever's going to do this be reasonably comfortable with working in spreadsheets, because a lot of this will rely on, I wouldn't say spreadsheet mastery, just being comfortable with a spreadsheet is enough, knowing how to kind of manage the spreadsheet and manage multiple like branches. Like I'm going to save this as a CSV file, but I'm going to keep a master one so that if I make any changes, I'll just export from the master, that sort of thing. Okay. Any questions about the data file management before we move on? Okay. So the next part, I know I didn't count very long before I decided to move on.
I think we're good.
I think we're good. Okay. The next part is data importing, and many of you probably recognize as soon as I said the next step is data importing that you're going to want to go to the place in Aware where you can import. Yeah.
We do have one question that just came in, so I'll go ahead.
Okay.
It's about special characters, and yes, there are some special characters that we don't want. And in the help document, all the ones that we could think of that are bad are in the help document. So yes, there are certain special characters that we don't want you having in the file, but in that help document, we do have some that we know. And obviously, as part of the beta testing, and as you guys get your hands on it, there could be some more discovery of those. To be honest, we've tested some, but this is going to be hit by a whole bunch of people, I'm guessing. So we may discover some more things like that. But yes, there are certain special characters that it would not like to import.
Yes, as an example, my field code that had not applicable, you'll notice it was just NA. My original attempt was N/A, and the slash threw it off. So special characters are not suggested. I go to my upload test section like I normally would, and up in the top right-hand corner, we have a brand new button that's going to be available for y'all once this turns on, and that's custom importing, and it brings you to the new custom test import screen. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. You pick the test type that you want to import. Then after you pick the test type, and this new test type, we actually have one in my demo site called new test type because I forgot to delete it. So you don't have new test type here in the screen. You pick the test type, you pick the grade level, the subject, and the year. These three details are specific to the way that these imports will show up in our assessment tree. Okay, so if you have the field test grade, then you would say it's in the file. If every single record is the same grade level, so you didn't include that information, then you would pick which grade level. Okay, same thing with subject. If the field test subject is in the file, you would say in file. If, however, there's one subject for the whole file, you would actually specify. For TSI, you might want to say other, because one of the possible import designs for TSI would be, rather than separating out your reading and your writing and your math as separate subjects, you might want one record to show reading, writing, and math just all at once on the screen. Okay, so depending on how you design your file and what you want it to look like in Aware, you may choose to make the subject a little bit more generic. You may choose to make the grade level something like secondary, okay, depending on how you want the data to show up in Aware. Okay, so these three options are mandatory, and you want to make sure they match what's in your file. And then you type in the title. You notice it says title of the test exactly as it should appear in Aware. I'm going to add one caveat to that. I suggest a very deliberate naming convention. So you might say TSI, so it's your TSI file. So you might just type in TSI. But the problem is, every time you upload a new file called TSI, you're going to be giving it the exact same title. So even though you have grade level, subject, and year as a part of the tree, I recommend something a little bit more deliberate, the way I see some of y'all use local test design, where you actually put in the year or the subject or the grade level. And I want you to think about specifically state tests, STAR, okay? You load in STAR every year, many, many times, especially in the spring and summer. You're just loading in files with STAR, okay? And every time you get an update file, like you get a spring 2017 3-8 file update, when you load that file in, what do? We overwrite the records for students who have already been imported. And if you have a new student in the updated file, then that new student gets added to the collection. And right there at the top of the view, when you pick, say, 2017, 8th grade history, it'll say at the top, the year, 2017, STAR, it'll show that. It'll say 8th grade. It has the entire title there, even though it was just STAR one file like everything else. And so I recommend a very deliberate naming convention. That way, if you do have to make corrections to your file, or you add any additional student records to the file and want to re-import it, you can do that, and it'll just go over the and be included with the original upload. Okay, so that's just sort of a kind of a pointer, even though you're not going to be doing this right now. I wanted y'all to think of titles as being something you need to be very deliberate about. Then you just choose the file, you upload it, and once you upload it, it shows up here in the pending file section. It loads right in. It shows up in the history section. You can see here on my screen, let me zoom in a little bit. You can see here where we loaded in quite a few tests, including some that errored out because we were trying to break it and see what would happen. Here's one that I loaded in successfully, but you'll notice that some lines were unread. And I can go over here to the bottom right where it says download import log and download it. And it actually pulls up a little text file. You can't see it because I have to switch my window, but it's just a little text log that tells me which rows did not come in. And I happen to know that I intentionally put wrong date of birth for those rows. And so it successfully imported the correct ones and successfully did not import the ones that it shouldn't have. So I can go back in, fix the file, and then re-import it. Okay.
Hey Ed,
so
let me stop for just a second. We probably should have started with this, and we forgot. We did this a couple of times already with our beta districts, and we started right with them. But to be able to, some of you that are on this webinar may not even know where we are because you don't have access to see this. So this was I forgot too. So yeah, the ability to do this is only going to be afforded to those people that have the data administrator role in Aware. Those are the people that are uploading your star files when they come in for your district. Ed was just talking about star, and this is where they go do that. So this will be very familiar place for them. But if you do not have access to this, I mean, you may be the eduphorian for your district and whatever, but you're not the data administrator for Aware, then, you could have them watch this recording. There's going to be a help document that they can go to. You're just gathering the information. But if you're trying to go click and follow along, obviously we hadn't even released this yet, but this place is already there because it's where they upload other things as well. But if you're not a data administrator, then you don't have access to manage test types. You don't have access to upload test files, but those people that manage Aware for your district would.
Yes, thank you, Jason. That's something I should have said at the beginning. You're right. That was it was a very short conversation for us trying to decide who would be able to do this. It needs to be data administrators and only data administrators. You're not going to want too many people with their hands involved in this because part of the data outside of this, looking at the views in Aware and drawing conclusions from the student results, is you need to have good data in. And we want to make sure that for each of our districts, as few hands as possible are involved in this. Now, that does not mean that you listening to this webinar wouldn't be involved in the data file management. If you're an assessment person, but somebody else in your district loads files in, you may be responsible for managing the Excel files and making sure that those student records are correct. We're limiting the interface part to people who are data administrators. So data importing, pretty straightforward. For every new file, you click on custom import, you manage the features up here, you put a deliberate title in there, you say upload, and it goes right into the system. And so now we're going to go right to the very last part, and that is let's view some data. And I'm actually going to go first to the data that I built so that it's the field y'all are familiar with, and then I'm going to show you Jason's TSI one because that's a little bit more real world. So in your assessment tree, you actually have a section, or you will have a section called custom import test right there by student inventories. And when you click on that, you will see all the test types that you managed and got some data into. And when I say custom testing is the best, that's the test type I've just been looking at. You can actually look at the tests in Aware. They show up with the default view, which is the raw score, percent score, performance levels, which don't work. My performance levels are named after superheroes, and then date taken. But when you click the edit button and you go to your columns tab, you now have a new folder called custom testing is the best extensions, or TSI extensions, or whatever random inventory, I can't think of one right off the top of my head, extension. Okay, you're going to have a folder, and when you click on that folder, there's those extensions that you defined in the test type, and you can drag them over.
So how many of you guys that are listening right now just went, oh my God? Because I know you should have if you didn't.
Update the file, and there it is. That's everything that you've been asking for right there, a data view in Aware of the data that we designed. We've got some people who are putting me and OMG into the chat in answer to your question, Jason.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you're not excited about this, then you haven't been using Aware very long. I can tell you that.
You can see here my performance level and intervention level fields summarized by those field codes. This is why I was the most excited about those. You're actually able to see the percentage of students for each possible value. That's super cool. I think y'all are going to get a lot of legwork out of those. And then you can see that my percentages over here on the right both display as percentages summarized, my rank score summarized as a number. Comments didn't know what to do because that was a text. It didn't know how to summarize comments, just like any other text. But when I go down to the student level, there's exactly what you saw in my data file that I showed you a few minutes ago, but it has the student demographic information from Aware, okay? I've got my students where they were because I loaded in campus level data, but I can also look at the students where they are now, just like you can with anything in Aware. So this is super cool. In order to make these views available to teachers and principals and everybody else, you will have to save that view in your quick views, just like you do for like TELPAS and some of the other tests that don't make sense on the default view. So you're going to want to have a view in there called TSI view or something like that, maybe something more clever than what I just said. But you're definitely going to want to have some custom views in there so that they know that when they pick that test type, they can see the data. Okay. Okay. That's pretty much everything related to custom data viewing. A couple of points about it I'd like to kind of say. We put this in the assessments bucket for configuring test types. It's an actual test type, but theoretically, the sky's the limit to the types of data you can attach to student records and load in. Okay, so if you have specific things that you have related to assessment that you want tied to student records for the purpose of viewing and Aware, we're interested in hearing what you come up with. Okay, what are the types of things that you would like to import? Also want to point out that this is a phase one.
Right.
This is a phase one. We're going to get folks using this. We're going to see how you use it. And based on how you use it, based on the demand, and based on maybe some of the issues that might come up in using it, we've got multiple opportunities for updates to this feature over the next year. I talked about how this is an ongoing project for us. So we're very, very much interested. We've got our beta testers working on this for a little while longer, but I anticipate, Jason, when do you think, what do you think would be a good date to say that we anticipate this will be out for?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, this is something it's close. We want to make sure before we release it to the masses that we have caught things. We think it's very solid, but we want to make sure. But it's not something that you're going to have to wait a long time for. So, we definitely want to be able to announce this. And I was going to say this anyway, so I'll take a good time. So those of you out there, I mean, I know we have some Region Center folks on with us as well, but we have several Region Center events coming up in the fall, different Region Centers. So if you're in one, contact them and figure that out. We also, there's gonna be several of us at TSNAP events, the TSNAP forum and Region 11. We're gonna be at, and then obviously the Texas Assessment Conference. This is huge for that group of folks, and so yeah, we would definitely have it available for everybody prior to like the assessment conference. I'm gonna hope that it's the next couple of weeks that we'll have it out for everybody to use. But we'll make that announcement. And I want to add on to what Ed said about it is right now a test type. Some of you might already, if you were like me, thinking, well, I want to get attendance data in there from our, so I can say how many kids that didn't pass had more than 3 absences or whatever. We understand that there's data out there that you're going to want in that is not necessarily an assessment. And so it might sound funny to create a test type for discipline data or whatever. And like Ed said, phase one, we understand that. We've already predicted that. We want that too. You can get the data in. And so from our standpoint, mine and Ed's opinion is, we're dealing with people that just want data in there. And so this allows you to get it in there. The prettiness, the changing how it looks and all that stuff can come later, but it's in there. It's going to be a field that you can drag over on the edit tab and put in there. So, I mean, it's something that is usable, which in our opinion, we don't want to hold back having that out there for you. until it's perfectly pretty. The people that use Aware don't care. Yeah, this is not going out to everybody. I mean, it's just going out to the data administrators. So it's much more important for us to get it out there, get it available for you to use, than it is to be perfect. And we understand that we're going to make some changes down the road, but we're going to get, to prove that it's not going to be long for us to get it out there to you, because we're ready to get it out there to you and for you all to use it. Matter of fact, I created a little poll. And I'm going to launch this poll right now, and it's simply just a question to say, is this something that you think your district would use this school year? And so, if you would take the opportunity to go ahead and do that for me, I'd appreciate it. I mean, I can't think that anybody wouldn't, but just to kind of prove to our developer Jeremy, who's on the phone with us, or who was on the line with us, I told him this is going to be so huge, and everybody's going to be every district's going to do this. We're about to prove it. Anyway.
You see the results there?
Yeah, it's kind of overwhelming.
That's funny.
Yeah, Jeremy, you're getting a lot of love on the questions too. So.
Awesome. So we look forward to hearing from you guys. We're gonna I think that you're gonna be hearing from us in probably a few weeks about the status of this being kind of a positive momentum. And so
and we'll probably do a follow-up webinar, because
yes,
after our beta testers get their hands on it, we may get some different ideas. We may use some different examples, but I could definitely see us, once it does release live to everybody, doing a follow-up webinar to kind of reiterate kind of how it works. So this is just the first chance. Oh, they want to see TSI. You told them you'd see.
Yeah, I lied. I totally lied. I kept saying I was going to do it and then forgot to. I'm the worst. Yeah, so you'll see that for TSI. Did I do the right one? The grade level one?
Hold on. I think I don't think we can see your screen. Let me close the poll, and maybe you can get the. There we go. I had to close the poll to get the screen back. Now we're good. So yeah, go ahead and do the one. So, I guess yeah. There you go. That's fine.
In this one, here I'll just show how I'll pull all the fields in. For this one,
it's a good example. This is a good example. And
Jason included go ahead. You did this one.
Yeah. So what we were talking about whether when Ed was taking you through the little import wizard and he was talking about grade and subject and how you could put it in the file or you could select the grade. Well, this is one of the ones where I had that file that I was kind of mentioning earlier when a student would have multiple records. And so this was the file where students had multiple records. And so the multiple records were there. And one record was for reading, one record was for mathematics, one record was for writing, and so I had it in the file, which means it on the Analyze tab. If Ed would move over there and kind of expand that and show you, even though it all came in on one file, just like STAR separates it, for the math test from the reading test from the writing test, it did that same thing here, and so I imported one file, but it had math, reading, and writing in it, so it separated it. And so there's a writing field, but that writing field is only going to apply to the writing test. In this case, that's why he's got it in there. It's blank, is because it's separated, and I'm looking at the math. I clicked on the math test, and so there's only math data. Now, obviously, you could put those multiple together, but in this case, that's why those are blank. I had to do that intentionally because I was testing whether or not, if it had multiple records for a student in a field that had different subjects, would it separate it? And it did. So that's a good example of that.
Yes, that's where some of it's going to take a little bit of kind of trial and error. What works best for your data view? Be thinking about, would you have wanted this to be under the subject other and all three subjects show up separate, like in one spot? Or would you want this to show up as I just want to look at math by itself, just reading by itself, and so forth? Those are the kinds of things you're going to want to think about. You're also going to want to do that for grade level. Do I want just all the students who took, especially for certain types of, college readiness types tests, you might want all of the student results together under the secondary bucket, or you might actually want to separate them out by multiple grade levels for data analysis purposes. So depending on the types of data that you want to view in Aware, that'll help determine which headers to use and which import, I guess, process you're going to want to follow.
Yeah, that's a great point. And keeping in mind that on that test history of when you import, you can remove it. And so if you import, I mean, it's custom. You're making it up. I mean, we were making this stuff up. And so when you make up what you want to get in, you may import that, go look at the data, and you're like, I kind of want it different. Well, you can go remove that imported data and do something different. And so, yeah, great point. It's custom. It's your stuff. That's the best thing about it. You're designing what you want to see, and then we're giving you Jeremy, our developer, gave you the ability to get it in there. So, yeah, a question about multiple years. Yeah, so yes, absolutely. It's going to separate it by year, just like any other test does. So that's going to be part either you're going to have the date in a file, or you're going to. I mean, you're going to select the year. Go back to that import process. Screen there,
yeah,
and you'll see where the school year, the year is there as part of that.
yes.
So there's the year right there. So you choose the year that you're bringing it into.
And that picks that, yeah, for the tree. You could still put the year in the title if you want that to be a separate defining feature that's going to help you for re-importing the data. But this up here helps the system know where to place that file and how to treat the records that are coming in. Are they coming in for the same administration? You can treat it as an administration. You know, this information at the top is saying this is all one administration, and any future import I do, if these fields match, then it's the same administration.
Jump over to the upload test files and show how they could remove a file or delete the data.
Yes. Yes. So when you're playing around with this and you find some things that you tried aren't quite working, you simply click on the tests and you say delete imported data. That removes the data completely from aware. And then after you've deleted the imported data, we have this as two separate steps because you could potentially want to delete the imported data, then maybe do something else with this file. But after you've deleted the imported data, you can then delete the file, which removes it from the lists, or you can re-import the file or download the file, whatever you need to do. But deleting imported data is the first more important step before deleting the file, which then removes it completely from the lists. Okay.
I think we're good.
Awesome.
Like I said, you'll hear more information about this. We'll obviously send announcements out when it's going to be available and all that stuff. And if you see us around at one of the events or whatever, you know, feel free to come ask questions about it. If you want to send Jeremy some gifts, so we can probably find a way to get them to him.
We've got a few upcoming webinars. I've got them up on the screen, so I didn't even format those right because I've got a dash for one of them and not the other. We've got a few upcoming webinars for new eduphorians and also for sort of a general topic Strive updates that we'll get more specific information about as time goes on. But as always, you can find out what webinars we have upcoming in our help menu. You can register for our weekly updates on our website. So please be looking for those, and please be reading those announcements that we send to you because like Jason said, we'll be getting more information about when custom importing is available to everybody. We'll have more information in those announcements. All right, thank y'all, and y'all have a great rest of the day and rest of the week.